I used to be so skinny. And I'm not talking about regular person skinny. I'm talking about so skinny to the point where you could count the individual bones in my rib cage. Right? I was medically underweight for my height according to the BMI scale thing. I went from that point to putting on like 45 pounds of muscle in just over a year. Right? And I'm gonna go through all of that whole journey in this short video, hopefully. Right? So in the first 7 months of my training, this was a very significant part of my training. In the first 7 months of my training, I went from 154 to 170 pounds, right? I went from 154 to 170 pounds. And at that point, I was doing something called lean bulking. Lean bulking was basically eating like very, very, very clean food, right? I would eat very clean food. I would train in a specific way. So I train the 7 aesthetic muscles, which are neck, upper traps, lateral delts, upper chest, biceps, abs, obliques, and lats, right? These are all the muscles that I was training because these muscles are what give the aesthetic physique, right? So basically what that means is that you know like how guys find girls with like a curvy body attractive, right? You know, like that hourglass shape, right? You know how we find that attractive? Girls, what they find attractive is basically a guy with a V taper. A V taper is basically like where your shoulders are much wider than your waist, right? So you have a good shoulder to waist ratio. And basically to build this aesthetic physique, you just train the muscles that I've just mentioned just now, right? So that was basically my training. And yes, my training was centered around building an aesthetic physique, specifically for female attraction, right? If you have a problem with that or whatever, who gives a fuck, right? That was the training that I did, and that was the reason why I did that, right? So this was my training. So my diet was super clean. You know, like how your influencers, how you'd imagine your influencers eat, right? You know, like the David Lates, the Alex Eubanks, the Usain, all those guys. Imagine how they eat, right? How they eat and how they train. They only eat like the clean foods. They only eat the rice and the lean beef. They only eat like the oats in the morning or like before their training, right? And that's like how they eat to maintain that very, very aesthetic physique, right? So that was basically how I was eating. I ate lean beef and rice twice a day, and I ate oats once in the morning, right? And in my mind, the entire thing was gonna be worth it, right? Because I was gonna have that like nice aesthetic physique, right? So of course, like the discipline wasn't difficult for me to maintain because in my mind I'm coming from a point where I'm 154 pounds. Literally, like I had hollow chest, like you could literally, as I said, count the bones in my rib cage, right? I literally had no muscle mass whatsoever. But we've come a long way from that point. Look at that. I went Icabra now. I went Icabra to maintain this massive chest. But yeah, the discipline was like something that I didn't have a choice on. I had to maintain the discipline. I had to just keep up eating the good foods and everything, right? So, in the first 7 months, I went from 154 to 170 pounds and I was 9% body fat. This is the most significant thing that I'm going to tell you, and that probably went right over your head, right, when I first mentioned that, because you probably, if you aren't into fitness, you probably don't know what 9% body fat really is. If you are into fitness, you're probably like, yeah, right, bro, 9% is like super, super lean. I'm talking about the influencers you watch, the ones who are like super lean, they're like 10% body fat. They're like 10% body fat, and that's what they try to maintain year round. I was 9% body fat. No one in your entire life, in your existence right now, no one in your life is 9% body fat. That's how lean I was. I was super, super lean, right? 9% body fat, and I was on a lean bulk, right? So I was on a bulk, and I was 9% body fat. Like, that's just fucking ridiculous, right? But I was so locked in. Like, I'm talking about only ever eating lean beef and rice as my entire diet. Lean beef, rice, and like oats before the gym, right? So I can have the carbs for the gym. That's basically all I ate. That's all I ate for months on end, right? And I ended up being 9% body fat, and I was like super, super tapped. And at this point, I would say that's one of the best I ever looked, right? Because again, 9% body fat, you would just be like so lean, abs chiseled, abs like fucking ridges. I had the obliques showing. It was like super good. So I could go out and take like the shirtless pictures, which is like something that I always wanted to do my whole life. So I could go out, take the shirtless pictures, whatever, right? So that was the first 7 months of my training, right? And this was probably one of the most significant parts of it, right? So that was month 1 to month 7. Now we move on to month 7 to month 15, which is like basically now, right? So from that point onwards to now, I did a huge bulk, right? So I did like a bulk which took me from 170 to 198, right? So I gained like lots of weight in that point, right? Like 7-8 months of bulking, right? So I did a massive bulk. I was just basically eating in a surplus every single day, and the idea here was to get as big as possible during the winter period, so that when the summer comes around again, I can just cut down. Takes me like 6 weeks to cut. I can just cut down, and then I can go back to having like an aesthetic physique, but with a lot more muscle mass, right? So I'm gonna be able to fill out the frame a lot better and look a lot better, obviously, in like the pictures in real life, whatever, because I have a lot more muscle mass, right? So I did a huge bulk. I increased my training days. I increased my volume and everything, right? So previously, in the first 7 months, I was only training 5 days a week. And in the 5 days a week, I didn't even include things like legs. I didn't even train like forearms, triceps, whatever, right? I only trained the 7 aesthetic muscles, right? Now I've increased my training days, and I've also increased my volume, which is basically like the muscles that I train. Now I prioritize the 7 aesthetic muscles. They're basically in the center of my training, but I also include other muscles, right? Like I train legs now, I train triceps, I train forearms, right? All these are the muscles that I wasn't training before, only training the 7 aesthetic muscles, right? So now I've included these extra muscles, and I've included my gym days. So I go 6 times a week now, and this training it's been like super hyper intensive training, because again, when I was bulking, I had a surplus of carbs. I could really train super hard, right? Especially if I had the carbs, and then I had the pre-workouts, and I had like the everything, the creatine that I need, the protein powder, whatever, right? It was like I was really training to my max capability, right? So that was the period from month 7 to month 15, right? My strength went up. I obviously put on like a bit of body fat because I was bulking, but that period was also very significant, right? So the total transformation is 15 months. And also now that I'm cutting, right? So I've just come out of that huge bulk, right? I've been transitioning into cutting, and of course, like transitioning into cutting means, I'm gonna cut calories, right? I've cut calories so significantly now, so that means I'm obviously a bit weaker throughout the day. I obviously try and eat the most amount of carbs that I can before the gym. That way my gym workouts are really good. But obviously, like, we're transitioning and we're like 10 days into it, so it's like I'm a bit agitated. But once the transitioning phase is over and I'm really just back to default, I'll obviously be able to cut to like that leanness again, right? So I'm cutting now, and that's just like a small side point, right? So that's the whole like transformation from month 1 to month 15. I trained the 7 aesthetic muscles. This was like my entire training, right? The 7 aesthetic muscles. I ate the right foods, right? So my diet was clean. I ate like your influencers. I ate super clean. I ate the right foods that would give me the most amount of progress. And I was basically just disciplined in these 2 things. I was disciplined in my training. I was disciplined in my eating. That's how I was able to go from 154, basically like shit physique, basically no physique, to like 198 in like such a short period of time, right? I've put on like 20 kgs, right? For those guys who don't use pounds, I've put on like 20 kgs of muscle, and that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else I want to include. Like and subscribe to the YouTube video.